Welcome to this year's Emerging Translator Mentorship Showcase, celebrating the great work of our 2026 mentees and mentors and giving you, our digital audience, a glimpse of who our emerging translators are and what they have been working on since October 2025. My name is Rebecca DeWalt, and I'm the Emerging Translator Mentorships Program Manager at the National Centre for Writing. Established in 2010 by Daniel Hahn, the Emerging Translator Mentorships Program is now in its 16th year. Its aim is to develop successive new cohorts of literary translators into English, particularly for languages whose literature is currently underrepresented in English translation. The scheme matches up experienced translators with emerging literary translators for a 6-month period, during which they work together on practical translation projects, developing their craft through working on a chosen text or texts. Mentees receive a bursary, and their mentorship also includes 2 industry weekends, especially tailored to the needs of emerging translators, as well as a visit to London Book Fair and attendance of the Assembly of Literary Translators in London. Since its inception, the program has supported 148 mentees working in 39 languages. Many of our alumni have gone on to become key figures in the translation world, and you will find our recent alumni on such prestigious prize lists as the TA First Translation Award, the Alta First Translation Award, as well as the International Booker Prize longlist and shortlist. The mentorships would not exist without the commitment of our mentors and the support from our partners. We would like to thank our mentors and funders this year. Thanks to Arts Council England, to Sawad Hussain for mentoring Alaa Beej with funding from the Sheikh Zayed Book Award. Thanks to Rosie Hedger, who has been working with Kristin, Dilani, and Nadarajah, funded by the Royal Norwegian Embassy. To our Faroese mentor, Marita Thomsen, who has been working with Kata Veress as part of the Far Lit mentorship. To Mohini Gupta, who has been mentoring Nachiket Joshi with support from the Charles Wallace India Trust. Clare Richards for mentoring Dasom Yang, supported by LTI Korea. Thanks to Jean Gasper for mentoring Madeleine Wulfahrt with support from the Polish Cultural Institute in London. Thanks to Katrina Garansvili for acting as Lithuanian mentor to Filomena Marmian, funded by the Lithuanian Culture Institute, and to Jonathan Reeder, who has been working with Kwait Sai as part of the mentorship supported by Flanders Literature. The introductions and readings were recorded in advance. If you are joining us live for our premiere, you can participate in the live chat on the right-hand side of this page. Our emerging translators are in the audience and will be joining in the conversation via chat. The translators will be reading short extracts from their mentorship projects. Foreign rights to their translations are all still available. If you would like to read a longer extract, we will be including a link to the ebook version of this year's anthology at the end of this video in the show notes. If you are interested in contacting the translators directly, you will find their contact details in the anthology itself. Alternatively, feel free to get in touch with us at NCW via info@nationalcentreforwriting.org.uk. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy the following showcase presenting you the finest work by new literary translation talents working today.
Hi everyone, my name is Kwait Sai and I translate primarily from Dutch and Italian to English. I'm originally from the United States and I now live in Brussels where I'm pursuing a second master's degree in literature studies and linguistics. When I'm not studying or translating, I like to write and learn new languages. Contemporary literary fiction is my main focus as a translator. I especially enjoy translating queer, feminist, and speculative fiction, but I'm also open to working on novels and short stories from a range of genres. One Flemish author whose work I'm currently translating is Raf de Bie. Today, I'm going to read an excerpt from the opening chapter of his recent novel, Verloren Miso, which I've translated as Missing Miso. The book is told through a series of encounters between Nina, a young woman who manages a comic book shop in Antwerp and has never had more than one friend at a time, and her unlikely new friend, Yusuke, a tailor from Japan who's homesick for miso ramen. When Yusuke talks about the miso ramen stands in Hokkaido, it's like he's talking about his first love. He gets a dreamy look in his eyes and his voice becomes tinged with nostalgia. The best thing to do then is run, because once he starts, there's no stopping him. All evening, he'll talk about the perfectly salted broth, steaming noodles, and all the possible combinations of toppings. Grilled corn, for example, with pork belly and a pat of butter, or bean sprouts, spring onion, strips of pork, and sesame seeds. He even goes so far as to describe the colors of the bowls he's eaten those exact meals from. There's nothing anyone can do about it. Yusuke lost his heart to the food stands in Hokkaido. At first, I try to broaden his horizons. But Yusuke, I say, we have good food here too, you know? Steak tartare, baked chicory with cheese and ham. The words are barely out of my mouth before Yusuke brushes them aside. Those dishes don't come close to the miso ramen in Hokkaido, he tells me. In fact, they should stay as far away as possible. So I try a different approach. I look up the best Japanese restaurants in the city, and Yusuke and I go out for miso ramen. I reserve the best table, and we stuff ourselves until our bellies ache. At the end of those meals, Yusuke wipes his mouth with a napkin and says, "Delicious." Then, without fail, he adds, "But it's no Hokkaido miso ramen." I try one last argument before giving up. "Maybe you're just romanticizing the past," I tell him. Lots of people feel nostalgic for their childhood. Things seem so much better then, more fun, more exciting, or, in your case, tastier. But a lot of the time, all those wonderful things weren't really that special. We just forget the bad parts. This reasoning doesn't win him over either. Yusuke is convinced that a bowl of miso ramen in Hokkaido would taste just as good now as it did back then. His childhood has nothing to do with it. After months of trying, I'm left with only one option. I have to let it go. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kristin, Dilani, and Nadarajah, and I mostly focus on translating from Norwegian to English, and I've been mentored by Rosie Hedger. I'm especially interested in translating humorist and satirical literature, but I also enjoy translating nonfiction work. I've chosen to translate an excerpt from Alaa, who's one of Norway's biggest writers in general, but is very known for his humorous writing. The excerpt is from a book called The Big Five, or Dyrene i Afrika in Norwegian. He's known for a very decimally simplistic and naivist style. And in this excerpt, we're going to get to know what propels one of the five protagonists in the novel into having a crisis in the first place, which leads him onto a darker path. So here's the excerpt. The cause of the chaos was the partner Sperber had shared his life with for over 20 years. His partner and his cadaver dog on the sofa were staring vacantly at the switched-off TV. Much like Sperber, his partner was a middle-aged and seemingly respectable man, well-dressed and slim and sinewy after countless of hours spent hiking in rugged terrain. He made his living by strolling through fields and forests, searching for dead people and animals. It was a steady business. Both people and livestock disappear all the time. Good cadaver dogs are not easy to breed, but they can reap considerable rewards for their owners when you finally get your hands on one. It's often said that both parties are at fault when things go wrong in a relationship, but in this case, Sperber thought it was exclusively his partner's fault. For a long time, Sperber had not noticed that something was wrong. He brushed off his partner's fatigue and cool distance as something caused by too much responsibility and stress at work. Sperber had tried to convince himself that things would improve after his partner had some time off work and a chance to recharge. But his partner slept, and nothing changed. Sperber was living in an emotional vacuum. The lack of physical touch was also hard to bear. He tried to tell himself that life has its phases and he would just have to deal with it like everyone else did, but it was hard indeed. As the months passed, the air in the large, bright apartment grew heavier and heavier. At times, Sperber thought he might also remain silent and sullen so that his partner could see how amusing it was to be ignored. But it backfired. It only became more obvious that they were at a cliff's edge. Besides, Sperber needed continuous validation. It had been like this since childhood. It was his parents' fault. They had praised him for everything he had done and had given him the impression that he was great at everything. The result was that he reacted sullenly if he did anything without recognition. It would have been enough if his partner had noticed that Sperber had tidied up the kitchen and offered him a smile, for instance. But a smile never came his way, and nothing ever got noticed. Eventually, Sperber no longer doubted that he was being systematically overlooked and started to realize that his partner no longer cared for him. It was a hard blow. How was it possible not to love Sperber? He considered himself an attentive, nice, wise, and even beautiful man. He was also what he would call an intellectually stimulating conversation partner. He read newspapers and books, talked to people through the plot lines of complicated films, and otherwise kept a good eye on world events. Despite all these qualities, his partner seemed to have stopped loving him at some point. This uncomfortable suspicion started to resemble a form of trench war and went on for months. Eventually, Sperber said that they needed to talk. Talk? No thank you, preferably not, is the impression Sperber got from his partner. But he wasn't going to let him get away this time. Sperber forced him onto the sofa and started to lecture him. They couldn't go on like this. At first, his partner fell silent, but gradually he started to speak, albeit in jerks and snaps, and rather half-choked. It eventually became clear that he hadn't behaved as agreed. He had unfortunately been with someone else for a bit. Not much, luckily, but just a bit. And besides, it was over now.
Hello, my name is Alaa Beej. I am an Iraqi translator working between Arabic and English. I'm also a translation content creator and a project officer dedicated to expanding professional opportunities for translators. The following text is taken from All My Shoes Are Tied by Adil Asad Al-Meri, a novel that explores what it means to be in a place that doesn't fit you. And I will now read some of my translation for this novel. I was in the 3rd grade, 9 years old, a student at the School of St. Louis, that honorable sheikh as they say. Though between you and me, he was neither a sheikh nor honorable. He was just Louis, the one that we captured at Dar Luqman in Mansoura. I have no idea how he managed to become a saint back in the land of the Franks, but that's a story for another time. Bastawasi got up from his seat and moved toward the blackboard where I stood. He came very close enough to slip his hands into my pocket and deposit something there. We used to wear smokes over our clothes to protect them from whatever a mess child might make, and these smokes had deep, wide pockets, perfect for a sandwich, or in this case for Bastawasi's mysterious object. Then he whispers this sentence, "By the Mus'haf, ears me." He went back to his seat without another word. I understood the second half easily enough. He wanted me to erase his name, but did he mean only his name, or his neighbor too? Why didn't he explain? And surely the first part of the sentence was connected to the secret in my pocket. I reached for the object and pulled it out. It was a tiny booklet, no bigger than 4 centimeters by 3, filled with hundreds of leaves and the thinnest papers and thousands of words. I want to keep it immediately, so I reached for and erased and wiped Bastawasi's name. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Philomena Yavamarmian, and I will be reading an extract I translated from Summer, The End of the World by Gabi Aplugia. Summer, The End of the World is a YA urban fantasy novel that draws on Lithuanian mythology, reimagining its deities in a modern setting. It tells the story of Giltine, the Grim Reaper and goddess of death, who after a tragic accident takes leave of absence and assumes a human form and name, living as a 20-something Gilta. However, she is about to have her new life turned upside down as she realizes that it's up to her to save the world. He stretched out his hand. An old key lay in his palm, the surface darkened by time, attached to a round metal keychain slightly larger than a €2 coin. On the dark blue charm glistened an image of a rich yellow bowl of soup, slightly tinged with green. Didn't my grandma have a keychain just like that? Gilta thought. This one too has been worn down by long stays and coat pockets, and the bowl looks as if it's also made of brass. I can't just hand it to you, you have to take it yourself, said the stranger, his hand still held out in the space between them. Last time you told me all about free will and how important it is, especially in deals like this, so if I had more time, I really would fill you in, but now... He rambled on, but Gilda had stopped listening. She couldn't look away from the scuffed key. Her entire body was being pulled towards it. It seemed so familiar, so dear to her. Surrendering to the pull, she slowly reached out and clutched the key in her hand. For a second, she felt a numbing chill, then sudden heat. Soon, all Gilda could focus on was her hand, burning, and the way her fingers refused to let go of the scalding metal. And then, all that had been forgotten came rushing back. Here she is now, next to the crumbling house, next to the pedestal which until recently propped up the statue of Patras Svirka, in between swaying scooter riders, glitching apps, and snippets of news about Elon Musk. But she is also there, in the time when trolley buses had yet to be invented, and their electric whiskers didn't graze the city sky, when the city didn't exist, and later, just as it came into being. Gilda could hear the iron wolf's howls from long ago. She could see the burning altars twinkling in the night and feel their warmth with her entire body. She could feel the coarse hair of the Fae as she ran her fingers through it. She could smell the midsummer flower crowns and the bundles of yarrow. She could see the scythe at the foot of an old man's bed and the scythe by the blue body of a drowned man. Finally, the only thought that remained was of the lost soul she had to take under her wing. The metal in her hand grew hotter and cold, and suddenly Gilda was back, just here, just now, right in front of him, Magila. Gilda, he said, his voice piercing through the fog, time, and the nausea churning in her stomach. Gilda squeezed her eyes shut as if trying to drive off the hallucination which was taking over reality. Finally, she found the courage to look into Magila's black eyes. She is here again, and now she clearly remembers how pine needles always get caught in his curls whenever they walk through a forest, and how his wardrobe is filled with countless combinations of the same black suit, white shirt, and skinny black tie, the collar of each shirt always starched. She also remembers how once there wasn't a day they didn't work side by side. Gilda's eyes filled with hot tears. She looked down at the piece of metal, now cold in her palm. In this life, it had taken the shape of a key. Anxiety began to tickle Gilda's fingers and run laps in the pit of her stomach. She could feel her heartbeat speeding up. This can't be happening. No, Gilda cried, her jaw clenched. The shape of Magila began to blur in a teary haze. She didn't even notice the confusion on his face. No, it isn't time yet.
Hello, I'm Kata, a literary translator based in Budapest, working with Scandinavian languages, Faroese and Icelandic in particular, German, Hungarian, and English. The same way as I enjoy juggling with languages, I quite like the genre hop as well. But the most intriguing thing for me to translate is prose with a poetic tilt. For example, stream of consciousness narratives, where creating a certain flow or rhythm is of the essence. The translation project I've been focusing on during my mentorship, Otrur Manni Rasmussen's Itchifirenta or Not Until Then, is a novel published 2019 in the original Faroese, and it is a great example of such a poetic text, with its calm, fragmentary, and poetic everyday language. It is a book about chronic illness and grief, exploring the impact of receiving a cancer diagnosis and living with a terminal illness, and it is written from the perspective of the cancer patient's partner. The excerpt I'm about to read is taken from the very beginning of the book. Write on white, search in the dark. Elsa pulled the duvet up to her chin. The flat was soundless. Write on white, search in the dark, she repeated in a hollow, groggy voice, and the yawn on her pale face slowly faded into her restless dreams. One of her legs was sticking out from under the duvet. I caressed her soft thigh, and she took a deep breath. A familiar sound. Her heartbeat was pulsating on her neck. I lay next to her, listening to her breathing in and out, the way breakers roar in the distance.
You could hear a slight snort from time to time, her hair spread out on the pillow, her face a familiar shadow. She looked like a tiny, lonely piece of sea glass in the sand, washed ashore, waiting for someone to pick it up for play until fatigue sets in. It was quiet and dark outside, as if the city lay in the stomach of a sleeping animal. Elsa's dreams were locked in. I couldn't enter them. No one could. I lay awake all night looking at her, observed the lines and wrinkles in her face as she tossed and turned, groaning. Her eyes darted left and right under the eyelids, up and down. She sounded like the scraps of a lost child's cry for help, or an angry man fighting a fight he's unused to. Her dream echoed here, where the dream was not, but the images remained locked inside her head, only escaping as desperate sounds. The uncontrollable night dreams were nothing compared to what she had to endure in her waking hours. But at times she would lie still, as if she had taken death at his word. She would lie there as if she were nothing, a great big nothing.
Hello, my name is Nachiket Joshi. I'm a literary scholar, translator, and educator based out of Bombay, India. I translate books of literary fiction, poetry, and also knowledge texts from Marathi and French into both English and French. As a part of this mentorship, I'm working on a long narrative poem called Hypatia by Arun Kolatkar. The poem itself is derived from a longer cycle of poetic sequences called Biski Vahi, which means wet notebook. The poem is about the ancient female philosopher and mathematician who lived in ancient Alexandria and was killed at the behest of the city's bishop, Saint Cyril. I'm going to read an excerpt from this poem. Some like it in a hot curry, some deep fried, and some as angels on horseback, which is basically oysters on saddles of bacon. Heavenly messengers, Peter, riding the wind. They say the Princess of Constantinople is a huge fan, and Orestes, that pain in the neck governor of this town, he loves them too. But if you ask me, Peter, if you're gonna have oysters, you gotta have them like this, raw, alive and raw. You can squeeze a bit of lime on top at most if you want to, but nothing else. How can you tell if the oyster's fresh? It's easy. Look, like this. You see this tiny knot here? That's the vital organ of the creature. Just touch it with the pointy end of your knife, or even softly with your finger. See how it squirms, Peter, this little beast in its shell. I had a great time today. Only problem is your hands get all sticky eating oysters like this. Could you hand me the towel, please? And this blood? What about it? It's nothing at all. Just a scratch. Cut my thumb a little. These shells are pretty sharp, aren't they, Peter? There used to be a temple for Serapis where we are sitting right now. You've probably heard of it, but I'm sure you've never seen it with your own eyes. You are just a kid, Peter. I was barely 16 myself when Uncle Theophilus tore that temple down. We killed 3 idolaters that day, crushed 2 of them with rocks and burned a 3rd one alive. Hotheads, all of us, back in the day, egged on by one thought alone, establishing Christ's rule over this earth. There was something different in the air back then, and I was there, right at the front of that crowd of car sevaks. The snake in Serapis's right hand had 3 tails, and each tail a head, a dog, a wolf, and a lion. I kept the dog's head with me for many years, just like that, for no reason, before I got bored and sold it off for scrap. Thank you.
My name is Madeleine Wulfahrt, and I'm a writer and member of the New Yorker's editorial staff. As a translator, I work from Russian and Polish into English. I've been mentored during this scheme by Gasper. Between 2017 and 2022, I spent time living in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Warsaw, and I'm now based in New York. As a writer and research editor, I work primarily with long-form creative nonfiction and reportage, which informs my work as a translator. I'm interested primarily in experimental prose, particularly the Polish genre of reportage, and experimental Russophone nonfiction. This interest in experimental prose also extends to prose poetry and lyric essay. And so my translation sample, A Life Made Out of Cloth, is the opening fragment of the Polish poet and artist Zuzanna Bartoszek's forthcoming book, 36 Rooms, which will be published by Hella Press later this year. Sitting somewhere between prose poetry and the short story, 36 Rooms flits between scenes of childhood and dreamlike post-apocalyptic visions. Bartoszek began her artistic career as a poet and oil painter, and her poetic voice maintains a delicate balance of vivid, mystical imagery and irreverent, internet-inflected vernacular. In 36 Rooms, she transposes this idiosyncratic voice for the first time into prose. So, here's A Life Made Out of Cloth. I found a set of glowing car keys on the street. On the warm black plastic, there were two symbols, an open and a closed padlock. I touched the open one. One of the parked cars blinked and chirped. So this is it. The car was silver with a silver logo. I looked around and got in. I fired up the engine and then slowly edged out onto the street. As it turns out, I'm a great driver. There wasn't much traffic. I drove home. When I got to the building, I drove into our lift and then into my flat. I made it into the entry hall without any trouble. I drove in very quietly, not waking anyone up or knocking anything over. The car just about squeezed into every room and through every door. Fair enough, the lift in our building was really quite big, but I was surprised that the car could even squeeze into the toilet. I opened the window and stuck out my arm to touch the tiles. They were soft and gave way under my fingers. I realized that the walls were made out of cloth. Everything inside had been printed onto drapes. This terrified me. Obviously, I shouldn't have taken the car keys and driven someone else's car here. Now my entire apartment was made of cloth. I backed out into the living room, where I realized that even my children and husband were just printed on fabric. When I first drove in here, I thought that their bodies were moving gently, breathing in and out after a post-lunch nap. But it was just the drapes swaying. At first, this seemed too severe a punishment for what I had done. But later, I remembered that justice is a virtue invented by human beings, and I accepted my new life made out of cloth.
Hi everyone, my name is Dasom. I'm a writer and translator from South Korea, now living in Berlin. I have translated Park Gyeom-ni, one of the canonical female writers from Korea, and currently I'm translating Kim Hye-ja's poetry as well as Park Won-seo's essays, from which I will read a bit in this recording. As you might have been able to tell from what I just shared, I have special interests in translating women authors, genre-bending texts, and especially nonfiction. The excerpt that I will read is pulled from Park Won-seo's essay titled Mimang, or Unforgettability, from the collection If Only I Could Be a Mere Traveler. In this excerpt, Park reminisces the first time she traveled to the US alone and feeling utterly lost and infantilized by the inability to understand language and words being spoken around her. She then goes on to elaborate on what begets stories in her world and once seated, how they develop into novels. So here goes. Once I returned home to Korea, the biggest relief and joy was the fact that all the cacophonous voices around me turned into language that I only had to pay attention to understand. To be frank, I didn't even have to pay attention. All it took was a melody. Its musicality was the water I'd grown up in. To be back in the water I'd learned to swim in was true happiness. Was I too old to change waters? Was it because of my profession, which required me to wrestle with language at all times? Perhaps both. It could also have been that because I was not merely traveling through, but actually sojourning, albeit briefly, I was fixated on the new water's strange textures rather than focusing on the joy of experiencing its newness. The origin of all my novels is a word, caught unexpectedly from the pool of my own experiences or the secondhand lives of others. At times, a stranger generously hands me a pile of novel plots. They unload their extraordinary experiences or their checkered fates, asking, wouldn't these make for a great novel? I meet people like this every now and then, but so far, a full set of meals prepared by someone else has strangely never piqued my appetite, not even once. I never allow myself to lift even a tiny piece of hint from it. I am cantankerous, there's no denying it. Not being able to forget an errant word heard in passing, a word that not only sets my imagination running, but also begets images and demands a story to form, is not just a habit I acquired since I became a novelist.
I hope you enjoyed our showcase and that the short extracts our wonderful translators have read are making you yearn for more. Lucky for you, you have to look no further than the NCW website, where you can read longer versions in this year's digital anthology at the link on the following slide. If you would prefer a physical copy of the anthology, you can also register your interest on our website to have it posted to you. If you are interested in any or all of our translation activities and programs at NCW, please go to our website at www.nationalcenterforwriting.org.uk/get-involved/translators. Applications for the 2026-27 program will open at the end of July 2026. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.